Okay, there's a mystical idea that says that the more potent and powerful something is, the greater the opposing forces step in to try to block it. So I guess, Erran, this conversation's cosmic.
Or there was just a problem with Zoom.
Yeah, correct.
One of those two things, yeah.
One of those two, right? Exactly right. Okay, great, fantastic. So super excited to spend some quality time together, Erran. You're a legend. You're an artist. You're a musician. You're a poet. You're a performer. That's a lot of talent, and I'm really keen to learn a little bit more about your process and ask a few questions. And hopefully, who knows where this will go, but we'll both learn with and from each other. So let's start off with, you're known for working in a variety of different fields within music, encompassing album projects, musicals, film scores. And in particular, what I'd like to learn more about is a project and is your band named Zohar, which for some of our viewers is, of course, at least related to, if not named, or based on the foundational Kabbalistic Jewish mystical text ascribed to the great Rabbi Shimon. So tell us a little more, Erran, about Zohar.
Yes, well, thank you. It's great to talk to you as well. So I think people obviously know me for my film scores, but they may not know the band that I kind of started with. It was about 20 years ago now, Zohar, which I put together. It was quite an interesting project, and I've always musically been interested in the way music can raise our spirits or affect our spirits in a certain way, and why that happens. And I also had a great interest in world music, and obviously I remember going to synagogue as a kid, and the temple, as they call it in America, and what I loved was we had a great chazan where I was growing up, and it was beautiful to hear that, and it affected me, even though I didn't understand all the Hebrew or the words. Somehow the music had a powerful effect, even without understanding what's being said. So Zohar, I kind of took that idea, and I took, I'm interested in that spirit of music, and I took Jewish chazanot, but also I'm interested in the links between spiritual singing all over the world. So I had Arabic muezzins, I had some even Pakistani singing, which Sufi singing, and they all have this special quality that I loved. And then I got a big interest in electronic music, so it kind of fused that with electronic beats and sounds. I also played trumpet and piano, so we had a bit of that going on, and that all came together. And we did 2 albums. One is called 137, and one is called Look to the Light, actually. Wow. So that's kind of just a little overview of what it is. But it was quite an interesting project. We did tour around the world in a sort of, quite a sort of underground club kind of way. But it was quite a cool project to be involved with.
When did you wrap up the band, or are you still playing together from time to time?
I'm still playing with some members, but I've been doing lots of other different things, so I kind of less active on that. We were signed to Miles Copeland's label, Miles Copeland was Sting's manager and the Police's manager and a bit of a legendary. He was born in Beirut, so he had this interest in Arabic music, which I was also bringing in, because Jewish chazanot and Arabic singing, there's a place where it crosses over together. In the melismatic phrases, and it's kind of the same thing. So I was always very interested in those where things met together, really almost there's a lot of you can see a lot of similarities in the music, not only the people and the culture. There's a lot of things that you can bring together there.
So you're interested in the intersection of cultures, of traditions, and really, if you will, peeling back the layers that divide us, or dismantling the barriers that are, artificially constructed, and basically, to use Hebrew language, ancient Hebrew language, discovering Hashem Echad, if you will, or the oneness, the divine essence or consciousness, or the heartbeat within all, which I think is super powerful. What you just said is really amazing. You said that Chazanot has certain overlap with Arabic music or singing. And you mean Ashkenazic or Sephardic Chazanut? Because Sephardic Chazanut is straight up influenced by Arabic. But it sounded to me like you were talking about Ashkenazic.
Yeah, I'm talking about, obviously, the Sephardic tradition, it comes from much closer to that, but it's different to Arabic singing. But when a Chazan sort of improvises a bit with those certain, harmonic minor scales, it's a similar scale to what an Arab muezzin would be singing, and what a Sufi singer would be singing, and what a flamenco singer might be singing, because it all comes from that Middle Eastern Arabic root, where everything came from anyway, where these religions came from. And the Gypsies took it to India, and they came back to Spain. And in Spain, actually, in the Middle Ages, where Maimonides was, and you had when they built the Alhambra and all those incredible buildings, you had Jews, Muslims, and Christians working together to create these incredible cultural. At that point, it was probably the world-leading cultural center, because of the intersection, as you said, of the cultures allowed something greater maybe than each one individually. And that was a bit of inspiration behind what I was doing a little bit musically there. Sort of, I took that idea that these things can be intersected without losing what they are, because this is always the problem, that if you put things together, then it turns into a soup and no one knows what they do.
Exactly. I was going to say.
You can keep, so what I try to do musically is also keep the character, keep the, respect, keep the respect for what the essence of what was going on, and yet put it somewhere else different to create something new. And that was a big interest.
That's very cool. No, I love what you said. Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory used to say that unity up there equals diversity down here, which I really love. The idea that diversity really is not the elimination of difference, it's the celebration of difference. And that, I think, is, you're showcasing diversity alongside one another and intersecting it or coalescing it, but nevertheless maintaining its integrity, which is special. What's really interesting, if you take a moment, of course, spiritually and ideologically also, when you go back, it's very interesting to note that, it says in the Torah that Abraham remarries or marries a woman named Hagar. Some say later in life marries a woman named Keturah. Some say was Hagar who he brought back into the marriage. And it says that he had 6 children with this woman, and he sent them to the east, Kedma, to the east, with spiritual gifts. And so it's really interesting that the Far East also has been influenced, according to certain sages, by Abrahamic influences. Obviously, Ishmael is the father of Islam and the, if you will, Arabic world. So it's quite an interesting template by way of, through which to understand our modern story. Tell me what you did with the dreidel. I love that song. I thought it was brilliant. And I think it's a wonderful example of really bringing something classic into the modern world and maintaining the classic alongside the modern. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, yes, it's in a way, it's a similar thing. It's trying to respect what was, dreidel, funny enough, the idea for doing a Hanukkah album was not my idea. It was, I was signed to a record label in LA, New Line Records, and a guy called Jason Lin, who was running it, he had this idea to update Hanukkah and make it sort of relevant for, like we have the Christmas albums, I suppose, and they say everybody sort of does a song. Right. We had all these kids songs from Hanukkah, and I remember them. I remember I had a record growing up of Hanukkah songs, and I remember hating it because it all sounded terrible. And so when this guy Jason said, do this album, my initial thought was, this is going to be difficult, because what we have here is quite like little nursery rhymes and nothing that interesting. But somehow I do like a challenge, and I do like to sort of mix things together in unusual ways. So I brought in so I turned Dreidel, which is this nice little kid song, really into this crazy gypsy hip hop fusion, which somehow, it's a slightly mad track. We also had a great rapper, Love, from New York, who's you might know, who's raps in Yiddish, involved.
Aramaic, by the way. And Aramaic.
Well, he raps in lots of languages, yeah. So I told him I want more Yiddish, because he said I want to do more. I said, no, keep it Yiddish, because I thought that was going to be better for this. So we ended up doing Dreidel, and it was I was quite amazed the way that turned out and how that could be mixed. And then we did a whole album, and that album is called Songs in the Key of Hanukkah. And it's half reimaginings of some traditional Hanukkah songs, and then half original songs. I got to work with some really great artists as well. A big Israeli star called Idan Reichel, who was great, and then Love, who's this great rapper, Aramaic and Yiddish, and also Yasmin Levy, who's a great Ladino singer, which is another tradition. And then I had my band here involved as well. So
do you feel like it's such a niche? It's like, it's absolutely brilliant musically and also culturally, actually. And I would imagine it takes a certain type of audience to appreciate it to its depth, because there's something great that's happening there. Did you feel like it was well received? Did you feel like it hit the note, that it got through to the audience you wanted to reach and beyond?
Well, I think, it hadn't really been done. I mean, I think there are, they had worse Hanukkah albums, but it wasn't, this was trying to sort of branch out and appeal to people in a different way. So we actually, when it did come out, which was now about 12 years ago, we got invited to be on the Conan show. And at that time he was in New York. So we flew out and we did that show just on the first night of Hanukkah, I think it was that year. And they did, I think they were surprised by how big, what a big reach that achieved at that time. But it's still, I don't know if people still know about this album, but it's worth, I think I'm pretty proud of the way it came out. And I think ended up being really great fun and interesting project.
It is interesting though, isn't it, how these things take on a life of their own? And isn't there an element of mazel to music as well? Like, you can have them really, I'm not the, let's say tremendously well-versed, but when I just actually listened to it in preparation for our talk, and I play some music, I sing a bit, I'm a chazan. In fact, it's quite a few years ago. Just after I got married, I went out to Encino for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to lead the services for Chabad of Encino. And every Yom Kippur, there was a fellow who would come in the morning with a hoodie, with security, and through his private door, and he would leave and come back during the Elah, and he would get the Aliyah for Mincha. And only later did I learn that his Jewish name was Shabsai Zissel Zimmerman, but many people would know him as Bob Dylan.
Yes.
So, I think most people would have preferred Bob lead the service, but they were stuck with me. But anyway, I guess back to the question is, it seems like certain things either just take off. Is there any type of science to it, or it's completely almost luck or good fortune?
Well, that's the $1 billion question. The record company certainly, that's all they think about, and they try and work out what will work. And often the result is they just copy what was successful before.
Right.
And if something is being a big hit, they'll try and do the same again and again until it gets overdone, and then something else happens. But for a musician like me, that's kind of quite a not a very inspiring way to work, just to sort of keep. And I always try and do something different. So I never really think about. I've been doing this for 30 years, I've had a career, thank God, and but you never quite know what's next and what's happening, and there is no real definite. That's kind of an unusual. It's not like a normal job. In other words, you never quite know what the next step is. Somehow, it's been all right for me, and I'm still doing it. But there's no real answer. I think you just have to do what you believe is the right thing, and you have to believe in what you're doing and do your best at it. And then there's the whole marketing thing and getting that out, which I'm not the best at, I think. But that's a whole. I think now with the Instagram and all these things now, I think they just want someone who has a big following, and that they'll assign them. Right. They've got 1 million followers or something, because that they know they've got a market and they don't have to do any work. That's a whole different thing. It's somehow the business side is not about the music. It's about what they think will sell. So I always think the best musicians sometimes, and the real musicians sometimes are they're underneath. You have to search and find them. There's some great stars who have succeeded, but for me, a lot of the commercial music is less interesting.
That's fascinating. So how do you personally remain, I guess, inspired? Next question, how do you evaluate success for yourself internally? And finally, what is the dream? Like, if you could summarize the dream in a few words, what would be the next level? I'm sorry if I'm just asking. Yeah. I'm just so, this is beautiful. You're such a beautiful soul. I'm just enjoying just bantering. So I hope it's okay if I just ask.
Yes. But now I've forgotten all your questions. Well, the dream, I'm quite a realistic person. And obviously, I don't really, actually, I never remember my dreams. So I think I just want to carry on doing what I'm doing and survive doing it, which has worked out so far, and do interesting projects that I work with great people. I think that's certainly from the career point of view. How do you evaluate success? That's, if you ask that, that's a big question. And there's many answers. There's there's obviously success in work. There's success in sort of your spiritual growth, or in your friends, or there's many other things that are not about the money, basically, because that's just one part of it. But it's a part that can cause issues, problems, as well as not problems. But so I try not to think too much about these things, to be honest. I think I'm not sure if it's helpful to always think about that, because what you see on Facebook, Instagram, and all that, you see all these pictures of people who are so-called who are living the dream. That's what they say. And it's all rubbish, because they've just hired a photographer to take very nice pictures.
Exactly.
And everything looks nice, but does it actually mean anything? Probably not very little, to be honest. But this is what we're bombarded with. So
I guess to elaborate on the question just a bit more is, are you motivated by how important is feedback for you? In other words, is it just about getting in the groove, being in the zone, playing the music, making the music, and doing it with people you love and learn from? Or does the feedback, or are you looking for the feedback, and how important is the feedback? What's the sort of the dance of pure expression versus feedback and somehow thriving or feeding off of that, whatever it may be, audience / etc.
That's another interesting question, because as you know, I do film music as well. So that's what I've been mainly doing for the last 15 years, doing scores for TV shows, film and TV, and working in Hollywood and also here in the UK. And you end up actually working in a studio alone, for hours, for days, and you have to write this music under incredible pressure, completely alone, really. In a big film, there's sometimes a team where there's too much to do and you're working a bit together, but essentially you're in a room, a dark room, trying to compose, trying to make everything work. And then you send the music out for feedback, and you think it's the right thing, but you know that it's completely subjective, whether the producers, directors will like it. So it's almost a nervous moment to get that feedback. And when you get the good feedback, it's a relief. And when you don't, you're ready for it and you just do another way. But I also play live. I have a band. I played all over the world, but sometimes my favorite thing is just to jam at home with friends for a little gathering. And it's a beautiful thing. Playing for a live audience is you get immediate feedback, and that is also a great thing. I wrote a musical where I wrote the lyrics were written by David Baddiel. He wrote the story. It's called The Infidel. It's actually about a Muslim who finds out he's a Jew. It's quite a funny story. Ahmed Jalili is in the film, yes. And then we wrote a musical based on that, which I think even improved that movie and made it funnier and more touching. And
musical still on?
So it was on. No, it was on about 6-7 years ago in Stratford. It was on for about 12 weeks, and we were trying to get it to the West End and it was great, actually. We had a great load of actors, and I think getting it to the next stage there with musicals is huge amount of money involved, and because of its subject of Muslims, and we have a song about fatwas and about burqas and all this stuff.
Well, you should have hooked up with Larry David on fatwas, right?
That's right. We were before Larry, but there's obviously
before its time, it was ahead of its time, maybe.
It was a bit ahead of him, yeah, but it was he did it. But what I was going to say was the way the commercial market works there, where there's a lot of people putting a lot of money and they play it safe again. So it was hard to persuade people to book. I think we were almost going to do it, and then the pandemic happened. So I'm not sure whether it's going to come back. It'd be great if it does, but it did run, and I was going to say that the music was written and the band was playing and the actors were acting, and I was watching it from in the audience, and that was another interesting way to get reaction from your music.
There must be a really deep reaction there internally to see a vision or come to life, and it's an amazing thing. I mean, I've written 4 or 5 books, and they've been translated into 10 languages and succeeded well beyond my imagination in their 12th or 13th print. And it's a similar thing. Like I think it was Stephen King who said, writing is a lonely profession. And I think what he meant was, you do it alone in your own mind, in your own way. You have no idea how it will be received or what it might look like when or if it comes to life. But actually, we had an interesting experience with Ahmed Jalili because we hired him to do one of our dinners. And he has a Jewish agent, and it was very clear. We said it's for a Jewish crowd, it's a dinner, and so let's keep to a certain type of material. And he just went all over the place, and he had a great kick out of me sort of making my way slowly to the stage to gently reset. And I tell you, till today, people don't stop talking about that little that wonderful tension that was created in a beautiful manner. But Jewish influences, do you have any Jewish influences? Is there a particular Jewish music that you connect to or like playing? I mean, from Kabbalah to some of the Israeli guys now that are huge, to maybe some nigunim, Hasidic tunes?
Well, I think my main influence was, as I said, like from the Jewish side was hearing a great chazan, which we were lucky to have, which I enjoyed. So for me, that was, I love soul music and Aretha Franklin and all the great soul singers, Otis Redding. They have an incredible quality when they hit a note. Even Nina Simone, it kind of hits you in your right in your soul, really, whatever that means. And the great Chazanot has that as well, you know, and great spirit, because I mean they came from gospel singing as well, so they were singing with a religious something extra,
right?
And you get that all over the world actually with different traditions. So I am really open to different, just hearing different sounds and that have that element that really excites me. So it's not really one thing, it's just many things.
Do you follow Chazanut or not really?
It sounds like I follow a football team, but
it's a big thing. There's a revival. I don't know if you know, but it's a big. There's been a resurrection of Chazanut in a big way.
Yeah, but I think it's an important thing. I've got to be honest. I don't go to synagogue that often, but when I do, if I hear great singing, someone's and everybody's singing together, then I think it's a much better experience, and you can get into it. But if you hear someone who's not so good, it's kind of becomes a bit dreary, and it's, you know. So for me, that's very important. But I don't follow not really, no.
There's an interesting teaching from Reb Nachman of Breslov, the founder of the Breslov movement. And he says that, he asked the question, why is it that when two people speak at the same time, let alone 3, 4, 5, we call that noise and it creates a headache? And whereas when many people sing, we call it harmony, we call it choral. What's the difference between speech and song? And he says something powerful. He says, speech comes from the body. And when it comes to our bodies, we're all distinct and disparate. And each of our bodies is hardwired with different needs, interests, hobbies, passions, aspirations, etc. And so when many people speak, there is a clash because the source of speech is the ego, is the body. He said, but song is the pen of the soul, to quote the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidic movement. And at the level of soul, we're all one. And so the more people sing together, the more power, the more enriching and the more potent that spiritual soul, as you touched on, is activated. I mean, you're also a Kohen, which is, wow, that adds a whole nother dimension, because the Kohanim they did engage in that performance in, you know, with the Levites who they were cousins with. They were literally the musicians of the temple.
I don't know whether they were all good singers, but that's not the question.
Well, they didn't have they didn't have some of the auto correct.
Auto-tune, yeah.
Auto stuff.
I'm just wondering whether I should ask you a couple of things about what you're doing, and it's been lovely to talk about my thing, but you know, you're doing great things about positivity and positivity bias. You've written a book about, I believe, and that it's quite hard to be, you know, we're living in, I mean, certainly in my lifetime, it seems to be one of the most difficult periods. We've been through COVID, we've got the Ukraine war, we've got Brexit here in this country, we have many conflicts and problems seemingly ahead, and terrible leadership. How, you know, we had that terrible, awful news in America about the shooting in the school, which is, you know, you're almost resigned to just saying this is just happening again and again and again, and nothing's going to change. And how do you stay? It's hard to stay positive if you think about these things too much. I mean, for me, I just feel like we try not to think about it because it's too upsetting. But you've written the book, so how do you feel about it?
Well, let me start off by saying, look, the title is actually, you know, it actually takes people by surprise, because the word bias is typically associated with something negative, right? You know, that's in our vernacular. Bias means a negative predisposition, but in fact, the word itself does not mean that at all. It simply means a predisposition. So, for example, is it bad to be biased towards yourself, or is it bad to be biased towards your children? Right? No, of course not. A parent should have a healthy dose of bias in relation to their children. Otherwise, their child is living on eggshells under extreme scrutiny and judgment and objectivity. I mean, we're not meant to be objective when it comes to our loved ones, to an extent, of course. So positivity bias really was born out of the years and years of my personal study and passion for the teachings of my mentor, the Lubavitch Rebbe of blessed memory. And look, to zoom out for a moment, social historians tell us that human beings have what's called a negativity bias. So for example, Erran, if you had 10 encounters with an employee or a friend or a partner or a child, 9 of which were positive, 1 of which was negative, which is the one you end up ruminating on and thinking about when you get home from the office or before going to bed, right? So, it's like the joke of the waiter going around the restaurant and asking, "Excuse me, sir, ma'am, is everything all right? Is everything all right?" And then sees 2 Jewish patrons and asks, "Is anything all right? Is anything all right?" So they say this was something that we developed evolutionarily simply for survival, because as you can imagine, if you're sitting out there enjoying the berries, the tiger could come out of the bushes and eat you alive. So almost by default and design, we began fixating on the potential threat and danger more than that which was already working out for us. The problem with that is that we now live in an era and a time where most of us will not experience life or death situations, definitely not on a regular basis. And so we've taken the hyper anxiety and vigilance of the past, and we now apply it disproportionately and unhealthily to very minor and very regular things that happen to us. And so something that really served us well in the time bygone today is actually undermining our well-being. And we know so much about now the data about positive thinking and how it's helpful and it creates longevity, et cetera. Just, in a word, Shimon Peres once said, both pessimists and optimists die the same deaths, but they live different lives. But the truth is, I would argue that they actually die different deaths. Because a number of years ago, I came across research from the BBC that showed that people who have positive and optimistic outlook, they tend to live between 11 and 15% longer than their pessimistic peers. Now, I would venture that if I came to the public market tomorrow and I said, I have a pill that can allow you to live between 11 and 15% longer, I'd be an international sensation. That company would IPO at staggering amounts, because we live in a world where we're so focused on longevity, on living longer. And so the point is, it doesn't just add life to your years, it adds years to your life. And so that's the first premise. The premise is it's essential. It's necessary. It's now part of survival, especially in a world that seems bleak, especially with mental health crises, especially during COVID, by the way. I've never had more requests to speak around the world than during COVID. As far as premise 2 of the book, people tend to think that positivity is something you're born with, right? Or your life circumstances must be perfect. The reality is it's not at all the case. Positivity is a matter of choice, not circumstance. And I believe it derives from perspective, not just personality. And what's incredible about this particular book is it's a study of an individual who lived through World War I, World War II, typhus epidemic, a refugee crisis. His father was persecuted by the communists, sent to Kazakhstan, where he died prematurely. His brother was murdered by the Nazis in Dnepropetrovsk, which is in the news today because it's in Ukraine. And his grandparents were gassed along with his sister-in-law. His own professors at Berlin became Nazis. He lived a life together with his wife after relocating to New York without having children, although blessing hundreds of thousands of others with children, including, by the way, on a personal note, my mother, who couldn't have children after having 4. And the doctor said, give it up and enjoy the 4. And maybe the Rebbe would give $1 to people to give to tzedakah, to charity on Sundays. And when my mom came to ask for a blessing for the babysitter who had cancer, the Rebbe took $1 and gave it to her and said, this is for the baby. And she said, but I asked the blessing for the babysitter. And the Rebbe said, this is for the baby. And my beautiful, wonderful brother, my best friend, was born 9 months later. So the point is, it's a study of this individual who did not live a life of peace or privilege, but lived an incredibly disruptive, turbulent life, and yet managed to maintain this and curate, as he once said, consciously a positive outlook. So point 2 is it's possible. And point 3, and this is where I'll conclude on this note, is when you zoom out and you talk about the main arbiters of human well-being and progress, there is a huge group of public intellectuals, academics like Steven Pinker, who wrote a book called Enlightenment Now, or for example, Johan Norberg from Norway, who wrote a book called Progress, and many others who talk about the 10 or 12 or 13 major axioms of human progress, like education, literacy, right? Even tolerance, like the poverty, above or below the poverty line, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to the major aspects of human existence, we actually live in unprecedentedly good times. And there's incredible data to back this up. We don't have the time to go into it, but just one word. It used to be that 90% of humanity lived below the poverty line. Today, it's the opposite, the inverse. It's only 10. And even when you talk about war, and I want to talk about just for a moment about this war, you're seeing something absolutely incredible, I have to say. You're seeing such a unified front by many, many, many nations, over 40 or 50 in coalition, including a country that was neutral during the Holocaust, Switzerland. Okay, think about that for a moment. And they're all suffering, as we know, inflation, we talk about recession, there's talk about a whole host of, knock-on effects. And this is not good for politics. It's not good for re-election, but they're all keeping that united front because the world has come to when I say the world, I mean, let's say the Western world has come to a position. And that position, I believe, is in part, at least, ideological, even if it's self-serving on some level, whatever. And that is war. No nation shall lift a sword against another. That, dear Erran, is literally straight out of the Bible, the biblical prophecies, which talk about an era called Mashiach, when the lion will lie with the lamb, or the wolf will lie with the lamb, and no nation and nations will take their swords and turn them into plowshares, instruments of death, and turn them into instruments or tools for life. So there's more to be said. I even think this, the Me Too movement, the rise of women in power, the idea even of the riots in the States, which were unfortunately in many instances misguided, but all motivated by a positive forward thrust of tolerance. Racism is not tolerated in mainstream society. It's at the fringe, and I believe it's becoming more and more towards the fringe. And I think, look, we can get into it in great detail, but I think if you zoom out, you'll tend to see that the bigger trends are moving forward and onward, even if there are zoomed in setbacks. And I think those setbacks themselves very often reflect a greater trend.
No, that's very fascinating. I think I probably just got one more question before I have to sort of shoot off and do other things. But I think I love what you're saying, that we're bombarded with a lot of negative things, but you can choose to see, as you said, this bigger picture, which there's a lot of positive. So what I think you're saying in one way is that we have to remind ourselves of that there's a lot of positive things going on, and you can put that in a big picture of the world, but also there's terrible things going on, but there's a lot of good things, and we have to remind ourselves of that. And also in our lives, things can be going on, but there's a lot of, often at the same time, you can always decide to think about. I think I did a bit of meditation when I think one of the techniques was to just say 3 positive things that have happened that day.
Yeah.
And somehow it doesn't sound like it's very much, but just doing something simple like that just somehow changes your mood. And it's incredible how powerful it is. So I think it's what you're saying is really important.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points to that to wrap up. Do you know how many planes landed safely in like 2019? So just before COVID, I looked it up at the time. Per annum, an average of 145 million planes landed safely. But that was also the year where 5 or 6 didn't make it. And if you stopped your average individual and you ask them, how safe is air travel? They tell you, oh, it's on the decline. Look at this plane that went missing, etc. And so I think that the reality is, right, that if it bleeds, it leads. And we know this. And that, by the way, that taps into the negativity bias. So that's very much going, tapping into human nature of fear, of anxiety, etc. And so, but that's a skewed perspective on reality. And here's the point. Some people say, oh, I like living a more realistic life, so I'm not positive. The reality is that what is reality, right? So if your reality comes through a particular lens, that lens, if it's perverted or skewed, is not reflective of true reality. So for example, going back to the point about planes, the perspective people might get from reading the headlines is completely inaccurate and not realistic. Because the reality of planes is that it's incredibly safe, and it's safer than so many of the other things we tend to do without question. So that's point 1. What is reality, and how do you curate your reality? So the first point is be conscious. And just like we physically diet, because we live in an era of extreme physical fitness awareness, we need to look after our emotional, psychological, and spiritual hygiene in much the same way. It's a diet. It's as simple as that. What are you eating? What is your mind nourished? Before going to bed, are you looking at, terrifying news or bad, or bad stories and all of that? Are you engaging? Are you bringing out the toxic emotions, or are you spending a few minutes in a calm, peaceful, serene ritual? This brings me to the second point, which is, and this is incredible. If I were to call Judaism one thing, it would be a religion of gratitude. And in fact, the word Jew comes from the word Yehudi, which is related, of course, to the word Todah, which means to be thankful. And in fact, our sages instituted, and this is brilliant, a 12-word prayer we say immediately upon awakening, without even getting out of bed, called Modani, simply thanking God for the gift of life itself. Think about that for a moment. It doesn't really make so much sense because we have no idea whatsoever how this day will unfold, right? The deal we're working on for 12 months might fall through. We might miss a plane ride. We might get a terrible diagnosis at the doctor's. So why be thankful at the beginning of the day? Be thankful at the end of the day, if it all went well. But here's the point. Every morning, God, the universe, whatever you believe in, deposits 86,400 seconds into your daily account, free of charge, and says, do something with this. Paint a canvas, create a masterpiece. That's something really worthwhile focusing on. And the sages even said one should say as much as 100 blessings a day. What they're really doing is they're trying to generate this sort of increase of touch points of gratitude throughout the day, because you put it so beautifully. It's about reminders. It's about coming back to the essential, fundamental, positive truths. And so a few quick tips before we go is cut out negative relationships. It's as simple as that. Cut out those individuals that leave you diminished, that leave you feeling inadequate, that leave you feeling small, or the people who gossip in your presence, and you can be sure when you're not present as well. All of that stuff, be more conscious. And if COVID gave us one thing, it gave us the ability to recalibrate, to reflect, and to be more conscious of how we craft our social circles and our patterns of thought, speech, and action. When it comes to our news or media content, if you feel like when you're going on social media, you're leaving more upset and envious and angry than you did going on, maybe it's time to rethink your social media habits, etc. So it's really about consciousness, about self-awareness. So point one, there's a negativity bias we have to counter. Point two, it's possible through conscious choice. And point three, it's good for health, longevity, for the mind, because the mind suffers less from dementia for longer periods of time when you have a positive network, a positive outlook. And point four, the way to do it is through concrete steps like expressing gratitude and like designing a social circle that's more conducive to people who lift you, who bring out the best in you. And of course, being more conscious of what we see, what we think about, how we speak, all in order to upgrade our life and the positivity levels. And it works. And if you're positive, you're an absolute joy to be around, and people want to spend more time with you. And conversely, of course, the opposite. And so I think it's not just a gift for ourselves, it's a gift for others as well. Erran, from my end at least, I could hang out forever, because it's a real joy to connect with a real someone who's clearly very thoughtful, and someone who's very, I think, who's very much attuned to the soul of existence, the rhythm of life and the soul of humanity. And so let me conclude by blessing you, my dear friend. You should be, in a way, it should go the opposite because you're the Kohen, but maybe we'll bless each other that you continue to live the dream, not the false dream of Instagram, but the real dream of taking what's inside of you and sharing it with the world, of taking your unique light and spreading it, and putting it into words and sounds that bring people together, and dismantling again those artificial barriers that society has built up, and tapping into that inner soul, I guess, of all. Amidst good health and prosperity, of course, and the wherewithal to continue to live your life and your passion. I forget who said it, but it's a beautiful line. Something like, the perfect life is where your vocation, the perfect vocation is where your talents and effort meet the world's greatest needs. Thank you, Erran, for spending.
Thank you, Mendel. Well, it's been very great to speak to you, and you're obviously a very positive person, and it shines through.
Thank you.
That's always a great thing to see, and I can certainly learn from that as well.